Sutherland's White-Collar Criminality was published in 1940 in the American Sociological Review. These ideas were first presented at a joint meeting of the American Economic Society and the American Sociological Society. His presentation of white-collar crime has earned him the name of the father of white-collar crime. White-collar crime contradicted the idea that criminals come from an underprivileged, unemployed lower class. Sutherland made three important contributions to criminological theory. First, he introduced the concept of white-collar crime and defined what actions constitute this crime. He stated that crime cannot be limited to actions that end up in arrest or a conviction. This is because most white-collar crimes are committed by doctors, politicians, and business executives who never come to the criminal law's attention. These people have the power to influence the enforcement of criminal statutes. Sutherland denied that crimes by respectable society members could not cause damage. His reasons behind this are that corporations can steal millions of dollars and that white-collar crimes are more costly than the publicly viewed crime problem. He also challenged the validity of current criminological theories, and by current I mean back in the 1940s when he wrote this. He explained that the theories that linked crime to the lower class or issues such as poverty, disorganized neighborhoods, feeble-mindedness, or psychopathy aren't really accurate. According to Sutherland, because white-collar workers don't fit into these categories, an explanation for crime must be looked for elsewhere. This allowed him to claim support for his differential association theory. In this theory, juveniles learn definitions favorable for breaking the law from gangs, and in a white-collar situation, business executives learn from their co-workers that fraud is smart business. He believed that the business world also supported criminal conduct. Sutherland sought to examine how crimes relate to business. He claimed that sociologists know a lot about crime, but not a lot about business. And also, economists know a lot about business, but not a lot about crime. He made comparisons between upper-class, white-collar crimes to lower-class crimes. He pointed out that because crime statistics are measured by official police records, they do not accurately capture business crimes. Police statistics show that crimes such as murder, burglary, assault, and robbery take place in lower-class areas. Criminologists create theories based on this data, and since statistics show that crime is concentrated in the lower class, many theories are based on poverty or by social or personal characteristics associated with poverty, such as weak families, poor neighborhoods, and mental disorders. Sutherland stated that his argument was made to help develop criminological theories, not for business reform. The purpose of Sutherland's paper was to show that current theories of crime are misleading. He claimed that crime is not associated with poverty or psychopathic conditions associated with poverty. He also stated that current explanations of crime are invalid because they're based on biased samples. He argues that an adequate explanation of crime must also address crimes that are committed by the upper class. Sutherland stated that business crimes include burglary, stock exchange manipulation, embezzlement, false advertising, tax fraud, and misuse of funds. Medical crimes included abortion, illegal alcohol and narcotic sales, fraudulent reports and testimony in court cases, fake specialists, and fee splitting. As we can see over the times, their doctors don't really prescribe alcohol anymore. You can get it at the store, so some of these crimes have changed. White-collar crime can be traced back to the robber barons of the late 1800s. These criminals included railroad managers Colonel Vanderbilt, A.B. Stickney, J.P. Morgan, and Charles Francis Adams. These men built and managed railroads with low morality and dishonesty. White-collar criminals of the 1940s, Sinclair, Fall, Musica Coster, Insole, Fauché, Mitchell, Whitney, Savitsky, Kruger, and the Van Swergenens. That's my guess. These men worked in the finance and industry and had many subordinates who followed their immoral commands. Their criminality was frequently reported in newspapers. Since these white-collar criminals are from the 1940s, this is mainly, I guess, where Sutherland got his ideas about including white-collar crime into theories. Sutherland presented two classes of white-collar crimes. The first is the misrepresentation of asset values or fraud. An example of this would be selling a product that is different than what the company advertises. The second is duplicity in the manipulation of power, or the double cross. An example of this would be if somebody purchased land that their company needed and then sold it to their company to gain a profit. Both of these categories involve a violation of trust. Unfortunately, in Sutherland's time, there were no accurate statistics available to measure these concepts. I'm sure that these measurements have improved, but they're still not as prominently measured as street crimes. Sutherland provides a few examples of white-collar crimes in the early 1900s. One example that he lists states that all employees in several Chicago banks participated in lie detector tests. 20% of them stated that they stole bank property. He states that in almost all of these cases, they were supported by confessions. While employee theft is not uncommon, we all know that lie detectors are not 100% accurate. We also know that many confessions are coerced. So given that these tests were done in the early 1900s, we can assume that interrogation tactics were most likely forceful and not very unbiased. Sutherland posits that white-collar criminality in politics can be used as a gauge for business crimes. He states that while political crimes do not provide an accurate measure of business crimes, they demonstrate that crime is not confined to the lower class. He also notes that this theory does not claim that every businessman is a criminal, just as other criminological theories don't claim that every poor person is a criminal. Sutherland argues that the financial cost of white-collar crime is most likely several times greater than the financial cost viewed by the public. He provides an example in which an executive at a grocery store embezzled $600,000, which was 6 times greater than the total annual loss from 500 burglaries and robberies in every store in the chain. So this one guy stole more money than all of the street crimes combined. He states that while $1 million burglaries are unheard of, $1 million embezzlers are small time compared to many white-collar criminals. While the financial loss stemming from white-collar crime is large, Sutherland proposes that this is not as important as the damages to social relations. According to him, white-collar crime causes distress, which lowers morale and social organization. In contrast, street crimes have a relatively little effect on social organization as a whole or social institutions. While they may affect the immediate ones, they don't have as broad of a reach as white-collar crimes. Sutherland calls for crime to be measured by an act that violates the law, not by an act that results in a criminal arrest or conviction. If crimes are measured this way, white-collar crime would be captured. He also states that crimes must be measured in the same manner. Therefore, definitions of crimes should be the same for all classes. So there shouldn't be one definition of crime for the upper class and one definition of crime for the lower class. The definitions should be equal. Sutherland suggests that white-collar crime can be measured through looking at non-criminal agencies. Because a lot of the white-collar crime that goes on isn't processed in criminal courts, he points to administrative boards, bureaus, or commissions that review a business's violation of the law. These cases, if they were put in front of a criminal court, could be tried and convicted. So if criminologists included these cases in their data, sampling biases would be reduced. Sutherland also suggests that cases examined by economic review boards that could reasonably be tried and convicted in criminal courts should be defined as criminal. Therefore, convictability rather than actual convictions should be measured in criminological research. He argues that since criminologists study street-level crimes who have criminal histories but no records, white-collar criminals with no records should be studied just the same. He points to civil cases as an area to gain background histories for white-collar criminals because a lot of them are processed in the civil courts. Sutherland relates gangsters' immunity in court to white-collar criminals. He states that street-level criminals may intimidate witnesses or public officials in order to avoid conviction. White-collar criminals, on the other hand, use their class to influence the administration of the law. Their control stems back to when court precedents and rules were created. So that means when they were making all of these laws to regulate businesses, the people who were making the laws were in charge of the businesses, so obviously they made them to their favor. Similar to how co-conspirators are prosecuted in criminal courts and studied as accessories to crime, Sutherland proposes that all offenders who are involved in white-collar crimes be considered criminals. He states that in white-collar crimes, usually only one offender is prosecuted, and this person is usually a politician rather than a business person. He provides examples of politicians taking bribes and being prosecuted, but says that none of the businessmen who provided any of these bribes are ever prosecuted. Sutherland states that descriptions of criminality in general should be equal across classes. Differences stem from how each class is processed. The lower classes' crimes are handled in criminal courts, and punishments for crimes include imprisonment or sometimes even death. The upper classes' crimes either result in no action at all, or they're processed through civil courts or administrative boards. Punishments include fines, loss of a license, or warnings. Prison sentences are rare. So basically what he's saying here is that although each type of crime is processed differently, they're both still crimes, so they should both still be included in theory and in research. White-collar criminals gain power through bribery and political pressures. They are able to influence whether or not the law is enforced. Their victims are often weak, powerless, and unorganized, such as investors, consumers, and stockholders. Sutherland points out that the exception to this is embezzlement, in which the employee steals from their employer. He also notes that embezzlement laws were created well before laws were made to protect consumers or investors. So obviously, the people in power wanted to protect themselves before they wanted to protect the people who they sell things to. In contrast to white-collar crimes, lower-class crimes are committed against those in power in the form of burglary and robbery. In conclusion, Sutherland proposes 3 reasons why criminal behavior is not due to his poverty or psychopathic conditions. First, he claims that this generalization is based on a biased sample that ignores white-collar criminals. Second, the idea that criminality is associated with poverty does not hold true with white-collar crimes. Third, conventional theories do not explain lower-class criminality. They explain why lower-class criminals commit certain crimes, but they don't look at the general process of criminality or why all people might commit crimes. Finally, Sutherland proposes that white-collar criminality is learned just like any other crime. People learn criminality from direct or indirect associations with criminals and become segregated from law-abiding peers. A person is more likely to become criminal if they associate with criminal peers more often than law-abiding peers. As we know, he calls this process differential association. He claims that this theory can explain both lower and upper-class crime. Sutherland also looks at social disorganization theory to explain white-collar and criminal street crimes. He states that differential association occurs because the community is not strongly organized against criminal behavior. Because groups or individuals are more invested in their criminality than the greater good of the community, it is difficult to form a strong opposition to these activities. So an example of this in street-level crimes would be a disorganized neighborhood where there's not strong social control or social bonds against somebody committing a crime, so they associate with delinquent peers. In white-collar crime, this may be associating with other co-workers who see fraud as an okay way of doing business.
If you go onto the FBI's website, there's an entire section on white-collar crime. There's articles, there's different links that you can click on that tell you about different types of white-collar crimes and how they can be prevented. This shows news articles from different cities that have recent involvements with white-collar crime, and then this shows you how to get educated about how to observe white-collar crime. I thought it'd be interesting to look and see if criminologists have been researching white-collar crimes recently. When you search for only peer-reviewed journal articles and only search white-collar crime, there are 503 results. However, when you limit this to Sutherland, there's only 19 results, which shows that there's not really that much being done. Sutherland wrote his article in the 1940s, and he mentioned such street criminals like Al Capone, and he also mentions white-collar criminals like J.P. Morgan. Today, we have our own set of white-collar criminals. There's Martha Stewart, who was arrested for insider trading and also had civil files against her. There's Bernie Madoff, who promised to make a lot of money for investments, but he lost it all. There's the Brie X scandal, a Canadian mining company who said they found gold in Indonesia and brought investors over, who lost a lot of money. And who can forget Enron, put away for fraud, conspiracy, and insider trading.